Hi there. You're listening to the Paralegal Real Talk, a contributing series to the Paralegals on Fire podcast. I'm your series guest host, Linda Odermott. We call this contributing series Paralegals Real Talk because when we get together, I'm going to spill the tea about where and how things are changing in the legal profession while sharing my perspective about those changes. Alaska faces a severe civil justice crisis, and legal deserts are a thing. Due to its large size and being the most rural state in the U.S., 90% of Alaskan communities are not accessible by road, and Alaska is home to 229 Alaska Native tribes that also face barriers to legal access. To address these issues, Alaska Legal Services Corporation partnered with local Indigenous organizations to create the Community Justice Worker CJW project. It was launched in 2018, and this bold initiative aims to bridge the justice gap by training non-attorney volunteers to address their community's unmet civil legal needs. On today's episode, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Nikole Nelson. Nikole is the founding CEO of Frontline Justice. Prior to joining Frontline Justice, Nikole was the executive director of Alaska Legal Services Corporation, Alaska's only statewide provider of free legal aid. During her 25 years in the field, she worked to build community-led, people-centered justice models and to expand the scope of who can provide legal help, including a groundbreaking launch of Partnering for Native Health, a medical legal partnership involving non-lawyer justice workers that won the 2019 World Justice Challenge. She also spearheaded reforming restrictions on unauthorized practice of law for justice workers in Alaska. These reforms were approved in 2022 by both the Alaska Supreme Court and the State Bar Board of Governors. Nikole is a member of the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigenous Defense, or SCLAID, and I'm sure that's a great acronym. I just don't know what it is. And is also a member of the Legal Services Corporation's Rural Justice Task Force. We're so excited to have Nikole with us. So thank you, Nikole, for being willing to come and talk to us today, and welcome. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with kind of the first question, which is, what was the catalyst for Alaska's Legal Justice Workers Program to start? What happened?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here, and it's so great to have this opportunity to talk with you. So, the Alaska's Community Justice Worker Project was sort of the catalyst for that. Was really the Supreme Court of Alaska um, had an Access to Justice Commission, and we came together as a community to try to decide how we were going to address our state's access to justice crisis. So again, that's the crisis because there just aren't and there isn't enough legal help for those who need it across our big vast state. And
Right.
so, under our Supreme Court's guidance, we came together as a community and we included folks we try to include people who are not just attorneys or in the legal space. And so, one piece of that, we had some folks who were from, we included folks from the United Way, and we also included some folks who were healthcare professionals in trying to address the access to justice crisis. So, really, we were just trying to figure out how we were going to be able to stop turning away, for me as a legal aid provider at the time, how we could stop turning away people who needed the help that we were offering.
Right. But it's so unique in what Alaska proposed, right? But
Mhm.
so I know that it kind of came about because of the medical need that you guys had already established and it's kind of the response to that need because you guys are huge, like the largest state in, with the most rural population and not a lot of roads into these communities. So who came up with the idea, well, to use your existing infrastructure?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and maybe I can just step you back and
Yeah.
walk through it a little bit. So the first thing we did as a community, again, once our Supreme Court brought together a bunch of people who were interested in trying to figure out how we were going to meet our community's unmet justice needs. So the first thing that we decided to do was do some asset mapping and to figure out within our community first where our lawyers were and
Mm.
where our legal infrastructure was. And so we did this community mapping exercise, the Supreme Court did, or the court system, and it showed where the lawyers were. And this really came as no surprise to any of us. Like you said, we're the biggest state in the union, and we have like this huge, vast geographic area that's bigger than the next three states combined, but it's incredibly rural. So most of the population, which about half of the population, I guess, lives in Anchorage, sort of the big city where I live, and along the road system. And the other half is dotted across this vast expanse. And the communities that are off the road system can range from, really small communities of 30 people to maybe a bigger hub community of 6,000. But again, we have more than 229 tribal nations. There are more than 200 villages across Alaska, and 90% of our communities are off the road system. So this is what we were trying to figure out, sort of where our legal system stretched and where there were gaps. And so when we first did this analysis, we realized that the lawyers were all along the road system for the most part, or in larger hub communities, but there were very few private attorneys outside of sort of the bigger cities like Anchorage and Fairbanks and Juneau. This we sort of knew going into it, but it was pretty eye-opening when we saw it stretched
Sure.
across the map.
Yeah.
So the second thing that we did, once we didn't want to stop there, when we realized that we had a bunch of legal deserts, as they're calling them now, that exist in those places, we wanted to figure out what assets our communities had in those spaces where we lacked legal infrastructure. And so we did a community mapping exercise, and we found out that there were across the board the the infrastructure that had the biggest footprint in our state was the healthcare system, specifically the tribally operated healthcare system. And so down to almost every single village, there was a community health aide in every community throughout Alaska. And so we thought, wow, that's amazing. That's the biggest footprint across our state. They have the furthest reach. And so at that time, Alaska Legal Services, I was running Alaska Legal Services at that time. I reached out to some folks at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium and to see if they might want to partner with us to build a medical legal partnership. And my thought was, well, let's do this. Let's see if we can just borrow some of their infrastructure and stretch our reach, maybe embed legal aid into the healthcare system to expand to expand our reach a little bit. But it turned out to be the partnership was amazing. Because it went way beyond that. We learned so much from that partnership about how our partners in the tribally operated healthcare system were really thinking about delivering care to really remote areas in our state. And they were 40 years ahead of us in doing this. And so we learned about behavioral health aides and community health aides and dental health therapists who are all folks who have been upskilled from their communities, been given specific training so that they could provide quality health care procedures or dental procedures to folks who are living in those areas. And they had and we thought, "Oh my gosh, we should be doing this in the justice space. Why aren't we doing this?"
Right.
Yeah, so that's really where the idea for the community justice worker program in Alaska came
That's
about.
amazing and good on you. Oh my goodness. Um, okay, so you guys figured this out. You started, leaning into the medical space and kind of capitalizing on that. So, what did you guys come up with? What is the community justice or the legal justice worker? What do they do, and how do they become one?
Yeah, so community justice workers is really, we again partnered with our fabulous partners at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium and Alaska Pacific University. So they have a whole wing. I don't know if that's the right word that they would use, but they have a whole department that is focused on adult learning and helping to train and support community health aides, dental health therapists, and behavioral health therapists, people who are from the communities and have been trained up to perform these healthcare procedures. So we partnered with them to develop some asynchronous distance learning training modules that would help us upskill community members so that they could provide specific legal procedures. And so we started out, again, we're not trying to train people to be sort of mini lawyers, for lack of a better word. What we're really focused on were very specific legal procedures in so appealing SNAP benefits, denials of SNAP benefits, helping people who or maybe they've gotten a notice that they have a debt that they want to dispute and sending a letter about that contesting the debt. Uh, we also provide some trainings on the Indian Child Welfare Act um, representation, and that's something that was unique to sort of the population within our state. And then also wills, helping with wills. And these were just 5 areas that and domestic violence protective orders,
Mhm.
providing some advice. So we provided very specific, we developed training modules in conjunction with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium's distance learning program. Helped us develop the training programs, which are asynchronous on demand.
Mhm.
And as part of the training, justice workers, our community justice workers, take a case that's supervised by the legal aid organization, and they learn how to do it in sort of an experiential learning way.
Wow.
So that's how it
That's
initially.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, I think I cut you off. So
Oh, no, no. So those are just sort of like the 5 areas that we started with, and now, it turned out that they were very successful, and so based on that success, we're expanding to other areas, and again, the justice workers there, you can take, um, all 5 of the modules or only 1. You don't have to commit to, doing all 5 of them. You can be very specific to the training that the service or the legal procedure that you want to assist folks with.
and then, so it started out as just volunteers to fill that role in the community, yes?
Yes. So they're essentially, yes, they're volunteers for the legal aid organization. However, most of our justice workers have, like, I like to say their day job. They're working for another organization. So, for instance, they might be affiliated with a healthcare center. Some of them are based in tribal nonprofit organizations. Or they might work for a domestic violence shelter. They're really the go to helpers in the community. And oftentimes, as part of their job, they're being paid to help somebody do this. But for the legal aid organization, are volunteer for the legal aid organization.
Uh, And is there any kind of eligibility or, because a lot of the different programs that are rolled out around the rest of the US have looked at like a licensing program for paralegals or, modifying different programs to like New York's Navigator program or those kinds of things. So is there any kind of qualifications or metric that they need to meet before they can do these programs?
Yeah. So, a couple of things. They need to be taking the cases on behalf of the legal aid organization. So, the waiver is specific to the legal aid organization. And so that is one qualification. Also, the legal aid organization acts needs to vouch for the community justice worker and will say that they've provided the training and are willing to provide malpractice insurance. They need to provide consent to the client, informed consent to the client. And so those are requirements that exist within the Alaska program. Um,
And then, so you mentioned that you're already looking at expanding into other areas. So that must mean that it's being successful. Do you have any like metrics to show how impacts the program has made in the communities?
yes, absolutely. So I can tell you a couple of things over the course of the last year, specifically with so First off, we developed these programs, and we were able to move forward with the initial programs that we developed in Alaska without getting a waiver from our Supreme Court around unauthorized practice of law. And that was possible because Alaska has a very permissive unauthorized practice of law statute. So essentially, as long as you aren't holding yourself out to be an attorney when you're not one and you aren't charging for services, you're not committing unauthorized practice of law. So we could develop a lot, the initial justice worker modules and training programs we were able to do without getting authorization or an expansion or a UPL carve out for justice workers specifically in Alaska. But this gave us time to really test out and get some metrics in place when we went before the Supreme Court to ask for a waiver. And at the time that we did that in 2022, there had been the number of cases that the justice workers had taken on, they were 100% successful in achieving the results, satisfactory results from the client's perspective. And a couple of things I can tell you about that, they were able to draw down millions of dollars in SNAP benefits that otherwise would not have been distributed within our state. So that's one metric. They were also able to help people with wills. And again, they were 100% successful in all the cases that they had taken on at that point. So once we had that information, we went before the Supreme Court and we asked for a waiver that would allow us to provide additional training and and let people, justice workers, take on increasingly complex areas. So, for instance, representation in court um, in certain types of cases. So, we're working on that now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so we know how you got here. We know what's been happening, and we know where it's going. Do you have a vision of what this program might be like when you're done, reworking, additional areas of law or practice areas or scope?
Yes. So I think that we envision, and again, it's a work in progress. The legal aid organization now is continuing to grow the community justice worker program. But, when you think about the unmet justice needs that people who low income people face and people who can't afford attorneys face, there's a full range of legal issues. And some of them are very complex, and some of them just really people need some simple legal assistance to get them through the day, right? And so we know from the access to justice or the justice gap study from the Legal Services Corporation that right now 92 92% of those unmet legal needs are being unmet, right? And that's not even counting that's for people who qualify for legal aid. We
Right.
also know that there are folks that are right above that threshold who can't afford an attorney either, and they don't qualify for legal aid, and they also have unmet legal needs as well, right? So not our vision, I think, in the future, insofar as the justice worker movement goes, is that everybody in our nation has access to uh, right size, right, legal help that they need on demand from someone they trust in the community. And the community justice workers could be a piece of part of solving the access to justice crisis.
I love that idea, and I know that there's a lot of different jurisdictions that are looking at Alaska's program as kind of a model to start their own, legal justice worker program. So, have you been a part of those conversations? Are you helping other jurisdictions? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am now part of a new organization, Frontline Justice, which is a national nonprofit that is helping to mobilize, equip, and advocate for community justice workers across our nation and to clear space for them to be able to do the good work that we know that they're capable of doing. And so since that time, again, there are a number of jurisdictions that are considering reforms that are needed to allow justice workers to be able to help people within their communities and do this work. There are 8 places right now where justice work is what we would think of as community justice work is possible. And there are 20 plus states that are considering, that have working groups that are considering uh, adopting the community justice worker model as some variation of that. So very
That's
exciting time.
very exciting. That's amazing. Um, okay, so this is kind of my last question, and then I'll let you get back to your life. But if there was something that you would do differently starting working on this program at the start, what would it have been, or what lessons learned, right, as you've rolled out these programs?
Yeah, and I will say that this comes from my experience. I was a legal aid lawyer since I coming straight out of law school and spent a number of years trying to figure out how to address the justice gap. And the first thing I think I would have learned is I should have started sooner in thinking about how we could expand the pool of people who are able to help with these problems. And so I think that would be my number one thing. I would have started yesterday or 3,000 years ago. Like, we don't have any time to waste right now. And they're really qualified people who are out there ready to help, and we should be empowering them. And so that would be my number one, that would be my number one thing. The other thing I would think about too is sometimes I think in this space, we we kind of want to think, we're perfectionists. And so we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think the size and the scope of the crisis is so much that we need to, again, we want to make sure that we're doing quality control, that we're providing good service to people who are accessing our help. But we also need to be willing to try some new things and then course correct if they aren't working. And so I guess again, this just goes back to, you don't have to start with the most complicated problem. There are plenty of simple legal issues that people just need help with. Let's start with the low hanging legal fruit and let's come up with a way to solve those problems and then increase complexity. We don't have to do it all in one bite, eat the elephant in one bite, I guess.
That's such good advice, and I love that perspective. Thanks so much for spending time with us and just talking about this program and helping our listeners understand a little bit more about what happened in Alaska and where it's coming in the U.S. So thanks, Nikole.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.